there was a number of conversations around the terminology essential performance, and I think there was a lot of feedback provided that the terms were being confused with how FDA was using it versus the way that similar terminology was showing up in standards such as IEC 60601. And so I think one of the things that was looked at and the agency had communicated publicly, through some of the conferences they were at, is that they were looking at changing the terminology, in particular to try to align it with terminology that was in the design control regulation. And I think part of the, I guess, the underlying question about why the change from EPR to EDDO, some of what I'm inferring from that is, some people I think have considered EPRs to be a design input driven concept, and now the FDA is saying EDDOs are a design output driven concept. And I think there's a couple of ways, I can try to walk through that. One is looking at the agency's precedent around the use of design outputs, and also, looking at least of what the EDDO guidance says in terms of what its policy objectives are, and why the agency might have chosen to do it that way. So in terms of precedent, I think if we look at some of the guidances that the agency has released around this topic, for example, the FDA's ICH Q12 document talks about established conditions for devices, and states that one approach would be to assess characteristics of the product that are essential for its safe and proper use. And that language is footnoted from ISO 1345 design outputs. And then the way that the established conditions are described by FDA for the device includes things like design features that are essential to achieve the delivery of the labeled dose. And that, in my opinion, pretty closely matches with what the agency is saying about EDDOs. And that would make sense, at least in terms of lining up those two policies from a design output based perspective. There's also a number of other guidances. You could point to, for example, the transdermal delivery systems guidance, which draws some analogies between CQAs and design outputs, and that same language appears almost verbatim in the EDDO guidance. And so I think you can start to see how FDA has, over time, is sort of implementing design control based strategies for device parts of combination products, and in the EDDO guidance, broadly drug delivery devices, based on the design output approach. From a regulatory requirements and policy objective standpoint, the guidance is focused on verification, validation, and control strategy information for the device. That is essentially what the agency was asking for when it was using the EPR terminology. And so from a what is it doing standpoint, EPRs and EDDOs are doing the same thing. It's just now the agency has written, where they think the regulatory authority for that information comes from. And that, me personally, I think that makes sense because, when you're looking at things, particularly like design validation and control strategy, those would be applicable to the product, which would be based on the design outputs.